I received my new assignment from the Park Service headquarters in Denver that morning. The weather was crisp, typical for early summer in Colorado, as I pulled into the parking lot. 15 years as a ranger, and I still got a knot in my gut when they called me in for an unexpected meeting. "Mitchell, thanks for coming on short notice," my supervisor said as I entered his office. He didn't offer me a seat. Not a good sign. The office was cluttered with topographical maps and weather reports. My supervisor, most of us just called him Chief, looked up from a stack of papers with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need someone at the North Sector," he said, tapping his pen against a map of Rocky Mountain National Park. Budget finally came through. I nodded, waiting for the catch. The North Sector had been closed to the public for years. Rangers rarely mentioned it, and when they did, conversations tended to stop when I walked into the room. "That area's been off limits for what, 5 years now?" I asked. 6. Chief pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "You'll be stationed there for the summer season, minimum 3 months. Any particular reason it's opening now?" Chief didn't answer directly. He pulled a laminated card from the folder and slid it across the desk. "These are your protocols for the sector. Follow them without exception." I picked up the card. It contained only 4 rules, typed in bold letters. 1. Do not investigate abandoned camps. 2. If you hear whistling at night, stay indoors. 3. Ignore any voices calling your name. 4. Never approach children alone in the woods. I read them twice, waiting for the punchline that never came. "This some kind of joke?" "Those rules have kept rangers safe in that sector." Chief's voice was flat. Previous assignments reported incidents. Nothing we could verify, but enough consistency in the reports to establish protocols. "What kind of incidents?" I asked, still holding the card. "Follow the rules, Mitchell. That's all you need to know." He handed me the folder containing maps, emergency procedures, and maintenance schedules. Everything looked standard except for that card. "Radio check-ins twice daily," he added. "Miss 2 consecutive calls and we send someone to check on you." I tucked the card into my shirt pocket. "Sounds like I'm babysitting ghost stories." Chief didn't smile. "Get your gear together. You head out today." The drive took nearly 3 hours. The last 45 minutes on a dirt road barely wide enough for my truck. Trees crowded close to the road, branches scratching against the windows. I kept checking my GPS to make sure I hadn't missed a turn. The ranger station appeared suddenly, a small wooden cabin in a clearing that felt carved out of the wilderness rather than naturally occurring. I parked and stepped out, stretching my back after the long drive. The silence hit me immediately. No distant traffic, no airplanes overhead, not even much birdsong. I unloaded my personal gear first: clothes, books, extra food supplies, then the equipment. Standard radio set, first aid kits, maps, wildlife tracking gear, and my personal laptop. The cabin had electricity from solar panels on the roof and a backup generator behind the building. Inside, the station was basic but functional. A main room with a desk and communications equipment, a small kitchen area, a bedroom with a simple bed, and a bathroom with a shower that probably ran cold more often than not. A pot-bellied stove sat in the corner for heat. Previous rangers had left a stack of firewood along the back wall. I set up the radio first, following procedure. "North Sector Station to headquarters, radio check, over." The response came quickly. "Headquarters receiving. Welcome to North Sector, Ranger Mitchell. Confirm your arrival, over." "Arrival confirmed. All systems operational. First patrol scheduled for tomorrow morning, over." "Copy that. Remember your protocols. Check in at 0700 and 1900 daily, over and out." I unpacked methodically, arranging my gear where I could reach it quickly. Habits from 15 years in the service die hard. Through the windows, I watched shadows lengthen across the clearing as the sun began to set behind the mountains. The trees seemed to grow taller, darker. The 4 rules kept nagging at me. In 15 years, I'd dealt with aggressive wildlife, lost hikers, flash floods, and forest fires, but I'd never been given rules like these. They felt more like superstition than protocol. I pulled out the laminated card again. "Don't investigate abandoned camps. Standard procedure would be the exact opposite. Check for missing hikers, document the site, collect anything that might help identify who had been there." The whistling rule made a bit more sense if there were predators in the area using sound to lure prey, but ignoring voices calling my name, and the thing about children alone in the woods, that one bothered me most. Every ranger's first instinct would be to help a lost child. I pinned the card to the bulletin board above the desk. Whatever had happened here before, someone took it seriously enough to create these rules. The isolation started to feel heavier. Night fell quickly in the mountains. I heated some canned stew on the small propane stove and ate at the desk while reviewing maps of tomorrow's patrol route. The windows turned black, reflecting the cabin's interior back at me. I drew the curtains. The radio crackled once with a weather update, then fell silent. I checked my cell phone. No service, as expected. The satellite phone would work for emergencies, but otherwise, I was cut off except for the radio. As I prepared for bed, I found myself double-checking the locks on the doors and windows. The rules had gotten under my skin more than I wanted to admit. I'd been alone in wilderness areas hundreds of times, but something about this place felt different. The silence was too complete. The darkness outside too absolute. My last task before sleep was to check my equipment for tomorrow's patrol. Compass, GPS, maps, camera, first aid kit, water, and food. Everything in its place, ready to go. I set my alarm for 5:30 and stretched out on the bed. The cabin creaked and settled around me as the temperature dropped. Normal sounds, I told myself. Just wood contracting in the cold mountain air. Nothing to do with whistling or voices or abandoned camps. I stared at the ceiling, suddenly wide awake, listening to the absolute silence of the forest outside. 15 years of ranger experience had taught me that wilderness areas often held unexpected dangers, but nothing in my training had prepared me for rules like these. Tomorrow would be my first day patrolling the North Sector. Whatever was out there, I'd face it in the daylight. I woke before my alarm, lying still in the unfamiliar bed while my eyes adjusted to the darkness. My watch showed 4:57, just minutes before the alarm would sound. I reached over and switched it off, then sat up and stretched my stiff shoulders. Sleep had come in broken fragments, interrupted by the strange creaking of the cabin and my own unease about this assignment. I dressed quickly in my uniform, the familiar routine grounding me despite my surroundings. The coffee I'd packed made the cabin smell almost normal as it brewed. While eating a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, I rechecked my gear for the day's patrol. The maps showed a network of trails spreading from the station deeper into the restricted sector. I plotted a route that would give me a comprehensive first look at my new territory, marking waypoints where I planned to take environmental readings and wildlife observations. Before leaving, I radioed in my morning check. North Sector Station to Headquarters, 0700 check-in. Headquarters receiving. Proceed with your status, over. Beginning first patrol of Northern Quadrant, following Trail System B. Estimated return 1600 hours, over. Copy that. Maintain radio contact for any significant findings. And Mitchell, the dispatcher paused. Remember your protocols, over and out. I tucked the radio into its holster, grabbed my pack and stepped outside. The clearing around the cabin was bathed in early morning light, making everything look deceptively normal. Dew clung to the tall grass, and a light mist hovered between the tree trunks at the forest's edge. The path leading away from the station was overgrown but still visible, winding between ancient pines that towered overhead. I moved at a steady pace, making mental notes of trail conditions and vegetation patterns. Standard observations, the kind I'd made thousands of times before. The routine work helped push aside my lingering concerns about those 4 strange rules. About an hour into my hike, I realized what was bothering me most about the forest. The silence. National parks were never truly quiet. There should have been bird song, rustling undergrowth from small mammals, the buzz of insects. Instead, the woods around me felt muffled, as if something was absorbing all the normal sounds of wilderness. I stopped to listen, controlling my breathing to minimize noise. Nothing. Not even wind in the branches above. I made a note in my field book. Unusual absence of wildlife sounds. Possible environmental stress indicator. The deeper I went, the more pressing the silence became. I caught myself looking back over my shoulder repeatedly, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Ridiculous, I told myself. Just the isolation getting to me. 3 hours into the hike, I'd reached a point where the main trail curved around an outcropping of gray stone. According to my map, no ranger had documented this area since the sector was closed 6 years ago. The vegetation showed it, branches reaching across the path, pine needles thick and undisturbed on the ground. I rounded the bend and froze. Between two massive boulders that formed a natural alcove sat a campsite. A blue dome tent, the kind you'd find in any outdoor store, was pitched at the back of the space. Cooking equipment, a small propane stove, a pot, several eating utensils, lay scattered in front of the tent. A fire pit had been built using stones from the surroundings, gray ash piled in its center. What caught my attention immediately was the thin wisp of smoke rising from those ashes, days old, judging by their color and consistency, yet somehow still smoldering. Personal items were strewn around the site. A red fleece jacket draped over a low branch, an open paperback book face down on a flat rock, a half-empty water bottle tipped on its side. It looked exactly like someone had been sitting there moments ago and suddenly vanished, leaving everything behind. My ranger instincts kicked in hard. This was potentially a search and rescue situation. Missing hikers, maybe injured or lost deeper in the woods. I took a step forward, then stopped as the first rule from that laminated card flashed in my mind. Do not investigate abandoned camps. Every bit of my training and experience pushed against this instruction. Investigating abandoned camps was standard procedure. You documented the scene, collected identification if possible, looked for clues about where the campers might have gone. It was how we found missing hikers, sometimes saving lives. But something about this campsite made my skin crawl. The tent zipper hung open in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of a mouth gaping wide. The scattered gear didn't look randomly dropped in a hurry. It seemed almost arranged, like a display. I backed up several steps and pulled out my camera. Following protocol while also respecting that strange rule, I photographed the site from a distance. Wide shots of the entire camp, zoom-ins on the tent, the fire, the scattered gear. Enough documentation to be useful without approaching. After marking the precise GPS coordinates in my device, I did something that felt wrong professionally but right instinctively. I turned around and walked away. My boots crunched loudly on the path as I headed back toward the station, moving faster than my standard patrol pace. My radio crackled to life 2 hours into my return journey. Headquarters to North Sector Ranger checking on your status. Over. I pulled the radio from my belt. North Sector responding. I've discovered an abandoned campsite at coordinates. I read off the numbers from my GPS. Signs of recent occupation, but no campers present. I've documented from a distance per protocols and am returning to station. Over. A pause, longer than normal radio procedure would dictate. Then, you maintained distance from the site? Over. Affirmative. Took photographs from the trail, did not approach or disturb any items. Over. The relief in the dispatcher's voice was unmistakable. Good work, Mitchell. Continue back to station and upload your findings through secure server. Headquarters out. I clipped the radio back to my belt, that uneasiness growing stronger. The dispatcher's reaction confirmed something I'd suspected since receiving those 4 rules. Whatever was happening in this sector, headquarters knew more than they were telling me. The hike back felt longer than the journey out. Every sound, even the occasional snapping twig under my own boots, made me tense. I kept thinking about that campsite, the still smoking fire from days-old ashes, the precise way the personal items were scattered, the open tent zipper. None of it felt natural. I reached the ranger station by mid-afternoon. After securing my gear and washing up, I connected my camera to the laptop and uploaded the photos to the secure server headquarters used for sensitive information. The process finished quickly, but I found myself staring at the images on my screen. Something wasn't right about that camp. I zoomed in on different sections, looking for details I might have missed in person. The tent's interior was dark, the opening revealing nothing but blackness despite the bright daylight. The book on the rock was open to what looked like a blank page. The jacket on the branch hung at an angle that seemed to defy gravity slightly. I closed the laptop, not wanting to look anymore. For the first time in my career, I felt grateful for a rule that kept me from doing my job properly. Because whatever had happened at that campsite, I was increasingly certain I didn't want to know. I radioed in my evening check precisely at 1900 hours, reporting only the facts and my compliance with protocols. The dispatcher acknowledged without further questions, and I signed off for the night. As darkness fell outside the cabin windows, I found myself checking the locks twice, then 3 times. The rules that had seemed so strange yesterday now felt like a lifeline. Warnings from those who'd learned the hard way what happened in these woods. I fixed myself a simple dinner that evening after uploading the campsite photos. The pasta and jarred sauce tasted bland, but I barely noticed as my mind kept returning to those images. Outside the cabin windows, darkness settled over the forest with unusual speed. One moment, pale blue twilight filtered through the trees, and the next, complete darkness pressed against the glass. The abruptness was disorienting. After finishing my meal and washing the dishes, I made a fresh pot of coffee despite the late hour. Sleep felt distant, my nerves still on edge after finding that abandoned camp. I poured a mug and settled at the small desk to review my notes from the day. The wall clock showed a few minutes past 10 when I heard it. A clear whistling melody drifted through the trees from somewhere northeast of the cabin. The sound cut through the night air with unnerving precision. 3 notes up, 2 notes down, repeated in a simple pattern that seemed deliberately crafted to catch attention. I froze with my coffee mug halfway to my lips. Rule number 2 on that laminated card: if you hear whistling at night, stay indoors. The tune continued, sounding disturbingly human, not the random trilling of a night bird or the wind through rock formations, but purposeful, musical. It neither grew closer nor more distant, as if whatever made the sound remained stationary in the forest, waiting. My ranger training screamed at me to investigate. This was a restricted area. No one should be out there at night. If it was a lost hiker trying to signal for help, my professional obligation was to respond. I even stood up, reaching automatically for my jacket hanging by the door. Then I remembered the dispatcher's relief when I confirmed I'd kept my distance from that campsite. The seriousness in Chief's eyes when he handed me that protocol card. I stepped away from the door, moving instead to the windows. One by one, I dimmed the lights in the cabin, leaving only a small reading lamp on the desk. Through the glass, I could see nothing but darkness. No flashlight beams, no campfires, nothing to indicate another human presence. Just the endless black of the forest and that persistent whistling. For several minutes, the sound continued uninterrupted. I found myself unconsciously tracking its pattern, my fingers tapping against my coffee mug in rhythm with the notes. Up, 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 down, down, pause. Up, 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 down, down. The simplicity was almost hypnotic. Then it stopped, mid-phrase, as if cut off. The sudden absence of sound was somehow worse than the whistling. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, making every small noise within the cabin seem thunderous. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, my own breathing. I stood motionless by the window, straining to hear anything from outside. 20 minutes crawled by according to the clock. I had almost convinced myself to relax when I heard it. "David?" A voice called my name from the darkness, from the same direction as the whistling. Clear and distinct, it cut through the night and hit me like a physical blow. "David, where are you? I need help." My chest tightened with instant recognition. It was Sarah's voice, unmistakably Sarah's voice, with that slight catch in her throat when she was worried. My ex-wife, who lived 3 states away in Arizona, who had no idea I'd taken this assignment, whose number I hadn't even called since moving to Colorado 6 months ago. "David, please, I'm lost out here." The plea in her voice sounded so genuine, so frightened. For a split second, I almost forgot where I was, almost forgot rule number 3, ignore any voices calling your name. The logical part of my brain kicked in, analyzing the impossibility of what I was hearing. Sarah couldn't be here. She wouldn't know where to find me, even if she wanted to. This was something else, something using her voice. "David!" The call came louder now, more desperate. "I can see the cabin lights. Please come out." I backed away from the window, moving silently across the room. Whatever was out there could apparently see the small reading lamp I'd left on. I switched it off, plunging the cabin into complete darkness. For a moment I stood completely still, letting my eyes adjust, my mind racing through options. Staying put felt wrong, not with that thing so close to the cabin. It knew my name, knew to use Sarah's voice. What else did it know? The voice called again, this time with a sob that sounded painfully authentic. My skin crawled at the perfect mimicry. Moving by memory and the faint moonlight filtering through the windows, I grabbed my backpack from beside the desk and slung it over one shoulder. My radio went into my jacket pocket, along with my compass and the small flashlight I kept on my keychain. No way was I turning on lights now. I made my way to the cabin's rear door, the one furthest from the voice. Carefully, silently, I unlocked it and eased it open just enough to slip through. then closed it behind me. The night air hit my face, cool and damp. I stood with my back against the cabin wall, letting my senses adjust to being outside. No whistling now, just Sarah's voice still calling from the front of the cabin. Based on the sound, whatever it was remained at the tree line, not approaching the clearing. Turning on my flashlight felt too risky. Instead, I pulled out my compass, waiting for the luminous dial to settle. South would take me toward the main road, away from the voice and whatever was making it. "David, I'm hurt. Please help me." The voice had taken on a new note of pain that made my stomach twist. I pushed away from the cabin wall and began moving into the trees behind the station, keeping my steps as quiet as possible on the pine needle floor. 15 years of wilderness experience helped me navigate in near darkness, feeling my way past tree trunks and low branches. The voice grew more distant as I put distance between us, but also more frantic. The pleading intensified, becoming so anguished that each call felt like a hook trying to pull me back. I forced myself to keep walking south, using my compass to stay oriented as I moved deeper into the pitch-black forest. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, the calls faded to the edge of audibility. Still, I kept walking, afraid of what might happen if that voice found me alone in the dark. The terrain grew steeper as I headed south toward the main road, my boots occasionally slipping on loose stone. I allowed myself to use the flashlight now, keeping it pointed downward to light only my next few steps. When I could no longer hear anything but natural night sounds, the soft rustle of wind through pines, the occasional distant hoot of an owl, I paused to rest against a large boulder. My heart was pounding from exertion and lingering adrenaline. I checked the compass again, still heading south. If I maintained this direction, I would reach the service road in another hour or two. I took a small sip from my water bottle, wondering if I should radio headquarters. What would I even say? That I'd fled my post because something was imitating my ex-wife's voice. It sounded insane, even though I knew what I'd heard. Instead, I continued south through the darkness, determined to reach the road before making any decisions. Whatever had been outside my cabin, whatever knew to use Sarah's voice, was part of the reason this sector had been closed for 6 years. Part of the reason for those 4 rules I'd initially dismissed. I wouldn't make that mistake again. The whistling, the voice, they weren't random forest sounds or lost hikers. They were warnings, tests to see if I would break the rules, and I wasn't about to find out what happened to rangers who did. The first hint of dawn found me hunched uncomfortably in the cab of my truck, parked at a wide spot on the main service road. Sleep had come in brief, unsatisfying snatches between startling awake at every sound from the surrounding forest. My neck ached from the awkward angle against the window, and my mouth felt dry and tacky. I hadn't planned to spend the night in my vehicle, but after fleeing the cabin and that voice, that impossible voice that sounded exactly like Sarah, I couldn't bring myself to return in the darkness. The road had felt like the only safe place, away from whatever lurked in the trees near the station. As light crept over the eastern ridgeline, I started the truck and drove back toward the cabin. The cabin stood exactly as I'd left it, the back door still slightly ajar from my hasty exit. I approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding clearing for any movement or signs that something had tried to enter during my absence. Finding nothing unusual, I went inside and quickly checked each room. Everything remained undisturbed. I took a quick shower, the hot water washing away the night's tension, but not the memory of that voice calling my name. After changing into a fresh uniform, I made a pot of coffee strong enough to compensate for my sleepless night. At 700 hours sharp, I radioed in. North Sector Station to Headquarters, morning check-in. Headquarters receiving, status report? I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the previous night's events. All normal at the station. Planning standard patrol of Western Quadrant today. The lie came easily. I wasn't ready to discuss what had happened, not when I barely understood it myself. Acknowledged. Maintain protocols. Check in at 1900. Headquarters out. I finished my coffee, packed my gear, and headed out for patrol. The western trails were closer to the station than yesterday's route, winding through a series of small valleys before reconnecting with the main path. The familiar routine of walking, observing, and documenting helped settle my mind. I recorded wildlife sightings, sparse compared to other areas of the park but more plentiful than yesterday's section, and noted trail conditions for future maintenance. By midday, I'd almost convinced myself that last night had been an overreaction, perhaps even a vivid nightmare brought on by isolation and those strange rules. The forest in daylight seemed peaceful, if unusually quiet. I stopped to eat my packed lunch on a flat rock overlooking a small stream. The water moved sluggishly between moss-covered stones, catching sunlight in brief, bright flashes. I was just repacking my bag when a sound cut through the ambient forest noise, a child crying. The sound came from somewhere ahead on the trail. I froze, the fourth rule immediately flashing in my mind: never approach children alone in the woods. The crying continued, punctuated by small, hiccuping sobs that sounded genuinely distressed. I stood, torn between protocol and instinct. This wasn't a voice calling my name or whistling in the darkness. This was a child, possibly injured or lost. Moving cautiously, I continued along the trail toward the sound. Around a bend in the path, I saw her. A young girl sat on a fallen log beside the trail, her small shoulders shaking as she cried. She looked about 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair falling around a dirt-smudged face. Her jeans and t-shirt were stained with forest debris, and she held one knee pulled up to her chest, blood trickling down her shin from an angry scrape. Everything in my 15 years of ranger training screamed that this was an emergency situation. A lost child, injured and alone in a restricted area. The fourth rule suddenly seemed cruel and impossible to follow. I approached slowly, making my footsteps audible so I wouldn't startle her. She looked up, her blue eyes wide and tearful. "Hi there," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Are you hurt? I'm a park ranger and I can help you." She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I scraped my knee really bad," she said, her voice small and trembling. "And I can't find my mom and dad." I knelt down several feet away from her, removing my backpack to access my first aid kit. "My name's Ranger Mitchell. Can you tell me your name?" "Emily," she replied, watching me closely. "Can you help me find my parents, David?" A chill ran through me. I hadn't told her my first name, only my ranger title. I paused, first aid kit in hand, suddenly remembering the rules, the warnings, the voice that had perfectly mimicked Sarah last night. But looking at the child, at Emily, it was hard to maintain that suspicion. Blood was visibly running down her shin, a real injury that needed attention. Maybe she'd heard my name from someone else, or read it on my uniform nameplate. "Yes, I'll help you find them," I said, deciding to proceed cautiously. "But first, let me take care of that knee. When did you get separated from your parents, Emily?" I moved closer with gauze and antiseptic wipes from my kit. As I cleaned her wound, which was indeed real, a deep scrape with dirt embedded in it, she told me her story. "We were camping over by the big rocks," she said, barely wincing as I dabbed antiseptic on the raw skin. "Yesterday I saw this pretty butterfly, and I followed it for just a minute. But then I couldn't find my way back, and it got dark, and I was so scared." I applied a bandage to her knee, my mind turning over her story. If she'd been lost overnight, her clothes should have been more disheveled, perhaps damp from morning dew. Despite the dirt stains, they seemed relatively clean for a child who had allegedly spent a night outdoors, and her scraped knee looked fresh, the blood still bright red. "Here, drink some water," I offered, handing her my canteen, "and have some of this trail mix if you're hungry." She accepted both gratefully, drinking deeply and picking out the chocolate pieces from the mix first, just as any kid would do. Her actions seemed perfectly normal, yet something felt off. "Your parents must be very worried," I said, repacking my first aid kit. "Were they camping in a designated site? This area is actually restricted." Emily shrugged. "I don't know. Dad said he found a special spot near some really tall trees and big rocks. That description matched dozens of locations in this sector. Not helpful, but not suspicious either, just the vague directions a child might remember." "Well," I said, standing up and offering her my hand, "let's head toward the main trails. If your parents are looking for you, that's where they'd go first. Search parties always start from the main paths." Emily took my hand and stood, showing no sign of discomfort from her injured knee. The bandage I'd applied was already soaking through with blood, yet she walked normally as we started down the trail. "Have you been a ranger for a long time?" she asked, swinging our joined hands slightly as we walked. 15 years, I replied, watching her from the corner of my eye. Her gait remained perfectly steady, no limp or hesitation despite what should have been a painful injury. "That's a really long time," she said. "Do you like the woods, David?" Again, the casual use of my first name sent a small warning signal through my mind. I do, I answered carefully. That's why I became a ranger. What about you, Emily? Do you come camping with your parents often? Sometimes, she said vaguely. I like the animals. I saw a deer yesterday, and some rabbits, and I think I heard an owl at night. We continued along the trail, Emily chatting about forest creatures while I maintained a vigilant watch of our surroundings. The path narrowed as we approached a dense stand of pines, their trunks growing so close together that the trail seemed to disappear into a dark tunnel of branches. Is this the way to find my parents? Emily asked, stopping at the edge of the shadowed section. It's the quickest way back to the main trail system, I confirmed, feeling increasingly uneasy but unable to pinpoint exactly why. Every individual thing about Emily seemed normal enough. She was just a lost child who needed help, yet together, the details didn't quite add up. Okay, she said, suddenly cheerful again. She took my hand once more and walked into the shadowy path, pulling me along with surprising strength for a small child. Tell me about being a ranger, David. Do you ever see scary things in the forest at night? Her question hit too close to my experience from the previous night. I looked down at her, but her face showed only innocent curiosity as she gazed up at me. Sometimes the forest can seem scary at night, I said carefully, but usually it's just normal sounds that people aren't used to hearing. Emily nodded solemnly. Like whistling? My steps faltered. What do you mean? Sometimes people hear whistling in the dark, she said matter-of-factly. Did you ever hear whistling at night, David? Or someone calling your name? I haven't heard any whistling, I said, the lie feeling thick in my mouth as we walked deeper into the shadows of the pine stand. Emily skipped alongside me, her injured knee seeming to cause her no pain whatsoever. The blood had soaked through the bandage completely now, a crimson stain spreading down her shin, yet she moved with the carefree bounce of a child on a playground. Are you sure? She pressed, her voice light but insistent. Most people hear the whistling first, 3 notes up, 2 notes down, like this. She puckered her lips and whistled the exact pattern I'd heard the night before, the precise melody that had drifted through the darkness outside my cabin. The sound hung in the still forest air, making my skin prickle. How do you know about that? I asked, slowing my pace. She shrugged, a casual gesture that didn't match the intensity of her stare. Maybe you heard someone calling your name too? Someone you know who couldn't possibly be here? My hand slipped from hers. We stood facing each other on the narrow trail, the dense pines creating a tunnel of shadows around us. Everything about this situation felt wrong now, each detail clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Emily, where are your parents really? I asked, taking a small step backward. She smiled, a normal child's smile that somehow made my stomach twist. You broke the rules, David. Rule number 4, never approach children alone in the woods. She recited it with perfect clarity, though I'd never mentioned the protocols to her. How do you know about the rules? The same way I knew to use Sarah's voice last night, the same way I knew where to find you. Her smile widened slightly. You weren't supposed to run away. Most rangers stay in their cabins. The cold recognition I'd been fighting washed over me completely. This wasn't a lost child. This was something else. Something connected to the whistling, the voice calling my name, the abandoned campsite. What happened to the people at that campsite? The question slipped out before I could stop myself. They broke the rules too, Emily said simply. She stared up at me and I watched with rising horror as her eyes darkened, the blue irises expanding until they swallowed the whites completely. Black, bottomless eyes fixed on mine. But they were much braver than you. They stayed when they heard the whistling. I took another step back. What are you? Her smile stretched wider, too wide for her small face, curving up at the corners in a way that human muscles shouldn't allow. I'm Emily, she said, her voice unchanged despite her transforming features. I'm lost in the woods. Won't you help me, Ranger? She tilted her head as she spoke, leaning it sideways at an angle no human neck could achieve, until her ear nearly touched her shoulder. The movement was fluid, insectile, utterly wrong. My hand moved to my radio. I'm calling this in. Emily laughed, a sound like breaking glass that echoed through the trees with unnatural resonance. The birds that had been quietly calling in the canopy went silent all at once. Why are you scared now? She asked, her voice lilting with amusement. You were so eager to help me before. You bandaged my knee and gave me water and food. You held my hand. She took a step toward me, her movement smooth and predatory. I backed away faster now, stumbling over exposed tree roots. They told you not to approach children in the woods, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly to my ears. They told you to ignore voices calling your name. They told you to stay inside when you heard whistling. Why didn't you listen, David? I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail completely in my desperation to put distance between us. I heard Emily's laughter following me, seeming to come from multiple directions at once, ahead, behind, beside me, as if she was everywhere in the forest simultaneously. I sprinted downhill, my ranger training taking over as I oriented myself toward the station. Tree trunks blurred in my peripheral vision. My lungs burned. The weight of my pack slammed against my back with each stride. Emily's voice called after me, still sounding like a normal child despite what I'd seen. "David! Don't leave me alone in the woods!" The pleading tone almost made me hesitate. Almost. But the image of those black eyes and that impossible smile kept my legs pumping, carrying me faster than I'd ever run before. When the clearing around the ranger station came into view, I felt a surge of desperate relief. I staggered the final 100 yards, gasping for breath as I fumbled with the door key. Inside, I slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt, then methodically checked every window and the back entrance, securing each one. My hands shook as I moved through the cabin. Sweat soaked my uniform, both from exertion and raw fear. After confirming all entry points were locked, I grabbed the radio from my belt. "North Sector to Headquarters emergency," I panted. "Headquarters receiving. State nature of emergency." The dispatcher's voice crackled through, calm and professional. I paused, suddenly aware of how insane my experience would sound. A child with black eyes and a neck that bent at impossible angles. A little girl who somehow knew about Sarah and the whistling. I began, then moved to the front window, needing to see if Emily had followed me back to the station. She stood at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, watching the cabin. Her posture was different now, straight-backed and unnaturally rigid. No sign remained of the scraped knee or the lost, frightened child act. Just those black eyes, visible even from this distance, and that stretched smile. "North Sector, please respond. Do you require assistance?" I pressed the transmit button again. "Headquarters, I encountered..." I swallowed hard. I broke protocol number 4. There was a child alone in the woods. I approached her. A long silence followed, broken only by static. When the dispatcher spoke again, their voice had lost all professional detachment. "Are you currently secure in the station?" "Yes. All doors and windows locked." Is the child still visible?" I looked out again. Emily hadn't moved, remaining at the exact edge where forest met clearing. "Yes, she's standing at the tree line." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost feel the tension through the radio. "Ranger Mitchell, listen carefully. Remain inside the station. Do not open doors or windows for any reason. We're sending a response team. They'll arrive by 0700 tomorrow. Can you maintain position until then?" "Yes," I answered, though the thought of spending the night with that thing watching from the trees made my stomach twist. What is she?" The dispatcher ignored my question. "Maintain radio contact every hour until nightfall, then every 2 hours through the night. If you miss a check-in, we'll assume the situation has escalated." "Understood," I said. I placed the radio on the desk and sank into the chair, keeping my eyes fixed on Emily's motionless form at the forest's edge. The rules made perfect sense now. They weren't arbitrary protocols or superstitious precautions. They were hard-earned knowledge, likely written in blood by rangers who came before me. Don't investigate abandoned camps. Stay indoors if you hear whistling at night. Ignore any voices calling your name. Never approach children alone in the woods. 4 simple rules that stood between rangers and whatever lurked in the restricted sector. Rules I'd arrogantly questioned and then broken, thinking 15 years of experience trumped local protocols. Emily remained utterly still, watching the cabin with inhuman patience. As shadows lengthened across the clearing, I realized I faced a long night under that unwavering gaze, with only the radio's hourly check-ins to mark the passage of time. Whatever Emily was, whatever wanted me to break those rules, it had found me. And now it was waiting.